backdrop to the evidence that you'll hear today also includes the evidence of Mr. Maseko, who you'll recall right at the beginning of the Commission's hearings gave evidence that towards the end of 2010, he was approached by Mr. Atul Gupta, asked for a meeting, and on the day of the scheduled meeting, Mr. Maseko's evidence was that he was contacted by the former president, Mr. Zuma, who indicated to him that the Guptas wanted to meet with him and that they needed help and that he should assist them. Mr. Maseko's evidence was that he attended that meeting, and during the meeting, he was informed by Mr. Gupta that the Guptas wanted the 600 million rand advertising spend of GCIS, the Government Communication and Information Service, to be directed to the New Age. And he was further told at a later meeting that if he was not to oblige, he could be dealt with. Mr. Maseko's evidence was that he refused the instruction and that in February of 2011, he was transferred out of GCIS. We've also heard evidence in the Commission, Chair, of Mr. Gilliland. He was one of the early witnesses who is an employee of National Treasury. And what he had done for the Commission was tracked all of the payments that occurred on the BAS system, which is the repository of national and provincial government spend within the country. And he tracked for the Commission payments by national and provincial governments to the TNA. The upshot of that evidence, just to remind ourselves, was that between 2011 and 2018, there had been a total of 248 million spent by national and provincial governments with the TNA. And of that 248 million, 94 million was paid by national government, various departments within national government, and the remainder was paid by the provinces. And the highest ranking spend amongst the provinces were as follows. The Free State spent over that period 75 million with the TNA. KwaZulu-Natal spent 24 million, and the Northwest spent 22 million. So that was a capturing of the extent of the spend within national and provincial government with the TNA over the period 2011 to 2018. Chair, the Commission has also heard the evidence of Mr. Manyi. Now, Mr. Manyi was the person who was moved into GCIS after Mr. Maseko was transferred out to DPSA. And Mr. Manyi's evidence was to support the GCIS spend with the TNA. And you'll recall, Chair, that he did so on a few grounds. Amongst them were the following. He indicated that the positive editorial stance of the TNA was something that was attractive for government advertising spend. He also listed the provincial reach of the TNA as being a particular aspect of what would justify spend with the TNA. And then he also indicated that it was not the most expensive of the newspapers in which advertisements could be placed. And off the back of that, his evidence before this Commission was that there was justification in spending with the TNA. Chair, term of reference 1.6 of this Commission's terms of reference requires the Commission to determine, amongst other things, whether there were any irregularities, undue enrichment, corruption, or undue influence in the awarding of contracts and advertising spend with the New Age. It's a specific term of reference, and it is for that reason that there have been further detailed investigations undertaken in relation to TNA. The focus of this week's evidence is going to be to move to the state-owned enterprises themselves and to look at the extent to which they contracted with TNA and the extent of their spend on various aspects of the TNA offering, which included advertising in the newspaper, subscriptions for the newspaper, and then support of the business breakfasts, which was amongst the field of opportunities that the TNA offered to state-owned enterprises as well as departments. Chair, the investigation has been undertaken alongside existing investigations that have occurred and which we draw to your attention this morning in order simply to preface where those investigations went and landed and where the investigations of the Commission have taken the evidence further. Chair, the first of those is the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises. You'll recall conducted its hearings into state capture in 2017 and 2018, and in November of last year produced their report.
Yes, I remember.
Chair, that committee looked at one of the key Eskom contracts that was concluded with the TNA. They looked at some broader aspects, but their particular focus was the third of the contracts that was entered into in 2014 between Eskom and TNA in the order of 43.2 million. And Chair, a number of findings were made in relation to that, which I'll come to in a moment. The second investigation that we have uncovered that also occurred around this issue is an investigation by the Public Protector in 2013, 2014, and 2015, which arose from a complaint alleging a concern insofar as there was what appeared to be millions of rands of both department spend as well as SOE spend on TNA since its beginnings in 2010. And the essence of the concern was, at that point in time, TNA had no accredited circulation figures and no verifiable readership. And so the investigation that the Public Protector undertook was to engage with the DPE and the various SOEs who had spent monies of advertising budgets with the TNA to understand on what basis that spend was justified against a complaint that said there's no verifiable circulation or readership for this newspaper. Why are millions of public funds nonetheless being directed to this entity? Chair, we have been informed that that investigation of the Public Protector was actually never completed. There was never a final report issued on it, albeit that there are one or two references to the TNA in the eventual state capture report, which is the basis for the formation of this commission. But that specific investigation did not produce a final report. Nonetheless, there was important interaction between the Public Protector's Office, the Ministry, as well as in particular Eskom and Transnet, which we believe is important to put to the witnesses in the course of this week, because it was a warning from a Chapter 9 institution at the time that they were contracting with the TNA about the justification for that contracting and the value for money that may or may not be received. And so we will be putting those parts of interaction with the Public Protector to witnesses. Chair, in summary, the focus of the evidence will be on the Eskom and the Transnet contracts with TNA. The reason for that is that you've already heard SABC evidence on its arrangements with TNA. There are some further aspects of that evidence which I understand will be presented in a later session of the SABC evidence, so we will not traverse that this week. You've also heard evidence from SAA about its spend with TNA, and so again we don't traverse that. The focus will be particularly on Eskom and Transnet. And just in summary, the evidence of this week will show that insofar as Eskom is concerned, the total spend of Eskom over the period 2011 to 2017 was in the order of 59.6 million. It was broken down into 3 contracts. The big one, the third one, was the one I've mentioned previously. It was a contract for 43.2 million. And then the remainder is made up by subscription agreements with the TNA. Insofar as Transnet is concerned, the total spend over the period is in the order of 147 million. And that comprised both support for the business breakfasts that were flighted on SABC as well as advertising spend. And the evidence will take you through those various amounts that were committed. Chair, I indicated that the Portfolio Committee had made certain findings, and I indicated that what we propose to do this week is take some of those findings further. I'd like to highlight what the 3 pertinent findings of the committee were. Chair, the bundles contain all of the relevant documents. We'll take you to them in the course of the evidence. But just in summary at the outset, the Portfolio Committee found in its November 2018 report that given the limited circulation of TNA, it did not seem clear why Eskom would direct so much advertising spend to it. We propose to deal with that aspect with the evidence of current and former employees of Eskom, neither of whom gave evidence before the Portfolio Committee, in order to explore further what could have justified the spend and whether there was value for money when Eskom made the determination to enter into these agreements. The second finding of the Portfolio Committee was that Mr. Colin Magilla, who was then the interim chief executive of Eskom, had acted improperly in awarding the contract of 43.2 million to TNA in 2014. And despite that, there were no disciplinary consequences for Mr. Magilla, and there was no shareholder follow-up in relation to his conduct, which lawyers at the time had determined to be evidence of financial misconduct, as that term is understood in the PFMA. We intend to probe that aspect further with former board members of Eskom in relation to their decision-making at the time, and probe with them why no further steps were taken in relation to this irregular expenditure. And then third, and related to that, the Portfolio Committee found that it was unclear why the board of Eskom, which was appointed at the end of December 2014, ratified that 43 million contract with TNA. And they found that they could not understand how that ratification decision could be justified. Chair, in the course of this week, we will receive evidence from the former chair of the Eskom board at the relevant time, as well as one other board member, and those aspects will be probed with them. Chair, in relation to Mr. Magilla, there have been efforts made to contact Mr. Magilla over the last number of weeks by the Commission in order to have an opportunity to meet with him in advance of this week's evidence and indeed to have him present evidence. Those efforts have not met with success. They have included telephonic attempts to engage him on all available public numbers associated with him, as well as emails to the last known address for Mr. Magilla, but no response has been received as yet. Chair, it is our hope that possibly with the publicity of today's proceedings, Mr. Magilla may well come to, if he has not already, understand that this evidence is being presented to the Commission, and we hope would voluntarily engage us so that we can engage with him further. If that does not take place, Chair, we suggest it may be an appropriate case for a Regulation 10.6 directive at the conclusion of the evidence this week, or indeed a summons in due course. But Mr. Magilla is certainly implicated in the Portfolio Committee's findings, as well as in the evidence that you will hear in the course of this week. And so it would be in the interests of the Commission for his version of events to be placed before it.
Did you testify before the Portfolio Committee?
No.
Yeah. And is there anything that suggests that he was invited and maybe they
There is
also
a list of
experienced the same
persons
problems?
invited. We'll take you to that. He's not included in that list.
Oh, okay, okay.
And that was part of the reason for our efforts to engage him further.
Okay.
Chair, once we probe those aspects that the Portfolio Committee left open, we do Eskom first, we will then move to Transnet and interrogate its justification for the 147 million spend with TNA over the period. And the evidence there will include 2 current Transnet employees, as well as the former chair of the board at the relevant time. Chair, there's one caveat that I need to state up front about the evidence of some of the witnesses, and this relates particularly to the witnesses who were former members of the boards of Eskom and Transnet. Chair, the focus of this week's evidence will be on the TNA contracts, but a number of these witnesses have knowledge and information and insight that spans beyond the topic that will be addressed in the course of this week. We intend to probe the matters related to TNA and matters flowing from those aspects. But it may well be that those witnesses will be asked to return in due course as the other aspects of their knowledge and insight become relevant in the other work streams, as and when they present their second phases of evidence. So it's just important that it not be understood that the questions that are being advanced this week are the sum total of the questions that may be relevant to the information that these particular witnesses may have.
Okay, then no, that's fine.
Chair, if I can then move just to the procedural aspects, so that I can give you an update on what has preceded the evidence of this week. We will receive the evidence of 7 witnesses over the course of the next 4 days. All of those witnesses have been summoned to appear, and we're indebted to them for being here and for engaging with us in advance. Insofar as Rule 33s are concerned, 36 Rule 33 notices were issued in relation to the evidence, and of those 36, 32 received more than the 14 days notice that's referred to in the rules of the Commission. The remaining 4, 3 received 13 days notice, and 1 received 6 days notice. The reason for the shorter notice in relation to the last is it was a notice that had to go to the liquidators of TNA. It was provisionally liquidated, I think, as early as 2018. And it took some time to be able to identify the liquidators, but that has been successfully dispatched 6 days ago. Chair, it's also important just to note that all of the former Eskom board members who were board members in early 2015 have been given notice in terms of Rule 33, as well as former Minister Gigaba. Chair, it's important that I then place on record what responses have been received to date by those various implicated persons. If I can begin with Mr. Gigaba. Mr. Gigaba was implicated or may be implicated in the evidence of Mr. Pretorius, from whom we will receive evidence today, as well as Mr. Mkhwanazi, who will be attending towards the end of the week. Mr. Gigaba has responded to that notice, but not with an application to cross-examine either of the witnesses. What he has done is he has put forward to the Commission his version in response to their evidence, and he has asked that that version be placed before the Commission. With your leave, Chair, it's our intention to put to the very witnesses to whom Mr. Gigaba is responding his version, so that they will have an opportunity to respond thereto.
Yes, that's in order.
The second response is from Ms. Mabude, who is one of the former Eskom board members. Ms. Mabude has not applied to cross-examine a witness, but her lawyers have indicated that she is currently indisposed as a consequence of an operation. They have not, as a consequence, been in a position to take detailed instructions from her, and so she's indicated a request to reserve her position until she's able to engage with them more closely and after the course of the evidence this week. We've also received a response from Dr. Naidu, who is also a former Eskom board member. He, again, is not applying to cross-examine any witness, but has provided the Commission with an affidavit. And again, with your leave, where necessary, we propose to put his version to the relevant witnesses. A similar position obtains with Ms. Klein, who's also a former board member. Ms. Klein is one of the former board members who did give evidence to the Portfolio Committee. And so what she's done in response is provided us with her statement to the Portfolio Committee. She's not applying to cross-examine any of the witnesses, but she does want her statement to be placed before the Commission. She's also provided a copy of a particular board minute, which is relevant to her statement, but which was already in the Commission's possession and which we intend to traverse with the witnesses. Ms. Klein makes 2 further requests. She requests that she be notified if she's implicated in any way in the evidence this week beyond what is contained in the statement of Mr. Tsotsi, who was the witness in respect of whom she received the Rule 33 notice. And she's also requested to be notified if there were to be any adverse finding made in relation to her in advance of that becoming a final finding of the Commission, so that she might be given an opportunity to make representations. Chair, as a legal team, we see no difficulty with those processes, but we draw to your attention her requests in that regard.
Well, the one about findings doesn't, I think what she should be told
Yes.
is that she would need to make sure that closer to the completion of the hearing of evidence of the Commission, she makes that request afresh, because it may be that I wouldn't be inclined to tell people in advance
Indeed.
what I'm going to find against them or in their favor. But what I might do is give them an opportunity to make submissions on any possible findings that may be made.
Indeed.
And so they may be used to how, as I understand it, the previous public protector, I don't know whether the present one also does things,
Yes.
but I don't want anybody to necessarily think we would first give them findings in advance and say, tell us what you have to say. The inclination may be make submissions on any possible findings, and then findings are made on the basis that people have been heard.
Indeed.
You know, as long as people have been heard, I don't think that there should necessarily be any obligation going beyond that.
Indeed.
So, but we'll allow people, if they want to make representations on that at a later stage.
Thank you, Chair. We will make a particular note to communicate with her lawyers in relation to your indication just now. Chair, the last response that we've received is from another former board member of Eskom, Ms. Karim. She indicates that she's still considering her position. She requested yesterday a series of documents to be made available to her, and that was done. But there's no, at this stage, application to cross-examine or a version yet from Ms. Karim. She will no doubt update us in due course, and we will alert the Chair to any further responses from other former board members. Chair, those are the procedural aspects out of the way. If I may then just conclude with what we submit are the 5 main questions that the evidence over the course of this week will seek to probe. Chair, the first of those is why executives of state-owned enterprises directed millions of rands of their media and advertising budgets to the TNA when it had no accredited circulation and no verified readership. The second is what, if any, proper value for money analysis was done by these state-owned enterprises before they committed millions of rands to the TNA. The third is where there were proper processes within the state-owned enterprises to regulate media advertising, sponsorships, and subscriptions. To what extent may it be held or found that the arrangements with TNA were irregular because they flouted those processes? The fourth is what is the role of non-executive board members of the boards of SOEs in relation to the spend of those SOEs, and in particular in this case, what is their duty when irregular expenditure is identified, where auditors are seeking to report on it? What obligations do those boards have in the face of such irregular expenditure? And finally, what is the role of the shareholder when financial misconduct occurs within an SOE? Chair, we submit that these questions are all relevant, potentially to the recommendations that you may consider making at the conclusion of the evidence. Thank you, Chair. And with that background in place, if I may hand over to Mr. Mkiwa, who will lead the evidence of Mr. Pretorius.
Thank you, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Mbigiwa.
Chair, I intend to go straight into Mr. Pretorius's evidence, so with your leave, he may be sworn in.
Please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
Peter Johannes Pretorius.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No,
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
I do.
Do you swear that the evidence you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God. Okay.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pretorius, just to assist you to get your bearings, there are a number of files around you. The files, Chair, may we enter into the record as Exhibit MM1A and MM1B, the statement of Mr. Pretorius and its annexes?
Yeah. The liver arch file containing the statement of affidavit of Mr. Peter Johannes Pretorius and annexures will be marked Exhibit MM1A. And the other liver arch file that has got further annexures relating to Mr. Pretorius' statement will be marked Exhibit MM1B.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, during the course of Mr. Pretorius's evidence, I do intend to refer him to the affidavits and annexures of the other witnesses we'll hear during the course of the week. Would it be convenient if we could enter in their affidavits at this stage as well as exhibits?
Is it though the implicated persons? Which affidavits are those?
No, Chair, it's the witnesses who will be appearing during the course of the week. The
Well,
documents in
you-
their bundles, I'll be referring Mr. Pretorius to.
You may refer without us admitting those. We'll do that as and when the witnesses come.
Thank you, Chair.
You may refer, you may tell the witness that there is an affidavit by so-and-so who says the following. Okay,
Thank you, Chair.
all right.
Mr. Pretorius, you have provided a signed statement to the Commission. That begins at page 1 of file MM1A, and it ends at page 30 of that file. Its annexures then run from page 31 all the way to page 751 in MM1B. Can you have a look at the statement and confirm that that is the statement that you provided to the Commission?
Yes, indeed it is.
And can you go to page 30 and confirm that it is your signature that appears there?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And can you confirm that the contents of that statement are true?
I can, yes.
Thanks. Mr. Pretorius, at the outset, are there any corrections that you wish to make to that statement?
No, sir.
Mr. Pretorius, to start, can you tell us what your qualifications are?
I have a BA communication degree from the University of the Northwest and an honours degree in journalism and public relations and a postgraduate diploma in marketing.
And what is your employment history?
I've been employed with Eskom for the last 31
Sorry,
years.
Mr. Pretorius, please just raise your voice a little bit.
So, my apologies.
Or bring the mic closer. Yeah, okay.
Is that better, Chair?
That's much better.
My apologies. I've been employed with Eskom for the past 31 years in various roles.
Can you take us through the roles that you've held at Eskom?
So my first position was I was appointed as a non-technical instructor, so in the training department of Magilla Power Station. 9 months later, I was promoted to the communication officer position at the power station as it became vacant. From there, I was appointed as the communication advisor to the then group executive for generation, Mr. Johan van der Berg. And from there, I moved over to corporate in the role of the public relations manager for Eskom. And then I applied for the position of the head of marketing and was successful, and that's the position that I currently hold.
Okay, and you say in your affidavit that you are responsible for strategic marketing.
Strategic marketing, yes.
Can you explain to the Commission what strategic marketing is and how that differs from marketing?
So strategic marketing is specifically aimed at a specific business problem or a cause. So easy to explain for us is Eskom. We had some power constraints, and an energy efficiency campaign would then be a cause. So it's not necessarily to generate more sales, which is the other side of marketing, that is marketing and sales. So Nestlé would generate sales on a bit specific product. So the sales team will have targets, the marketing team will support them. Strategic marketing is purely about a business problem that exists within the organization that is solved not only necessarily by marketing, but also with some technical aspects. So in energy efficiency, it was marketing campaign as well as the light bulb exchange program that we had, the geyser blanket program that we had, the solar water geysers that we installed and so on. So there's a product component to it, a technical component, as well as a marketing component.
Now, Mr. Pretorius, as you know, the subject matter of today's evidence is predominantly the relationship between Eskom and the new age. Before we get there, though, I would like to spend some time for you to assist the Commission to understand what the processes were that existed within Eskom in relation to advertising and sponsorship agreements. You say at paragraph 9 of your statement on page 3 that Eskom uses agencies for its strategic marketing. In what circumstances would Eskom use an agency?
Eskom would employ 5 agencies generally. So you will have a creative agency, you will have a media buying agency, you will have 2 PR agencies. Of late, we will have a digital agency that looks at the social media side of it. So these agencies are appointed as agents at large that may enter into secondary agreements on behalf of Eskom, and then invoice Eskom, and Eskom would pay them.
And how are they appointed?
It's through a commercial process, an open commercial process. So at this particular time, we were still advertising, so we would advertise in the newspapers, on the website, and so on. And then the agencies then obviously do their submissions, and those submissions are then evaluated in terms of Eskom's BEE requirements, and the successful candidates are then provided to the technical team, who then evaluates individually in a room that is nothing else is allowed in there except the individual, so that there could be no communication between the individual and any possible supplier. So they will do the evaluation there, and once the evaluation is done, the shortlisted agencies are then invited to do a pitch presentation. So they will present their credentials, their former case studies, and then that would be scored, and all the scores will then be added up, and then the triple PFA, since it was signed into law, would be applied.
And apart from actually concluding contracts as an agent, what role do the agencies play for Eskom?
Well, they play different roles. So the media buying agency would be responsible for all media buying on behalf of Eskom, all forms of media. The creative agency would be the advertising agency, or we call it creative agency because they do more than just advertising, creative advertising. The PR agencies, you will have a corporate PR agency who looks after the corporate PR of the organization and assists EXCO in certain critical issues and so on. And then you will have an activations agency. As you can understand, Eskom has a lot of customers that are on the lower end of the LSM grouping, and therefore we interact with them on differently and direct way. So we have activations agency, and then the digital agency will look after the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so on.
Can we focus on the media buying agency? As I understand it, that's the agency that would be responsible for advertising in newspapers, for example. Can you talk us through the process that Eskom goes through with the media buying agency when it decides to advertise in a newspaper?
Yes. So the process that would be followed in Eskom in terms of the policy and the procedure that is in place is a briefing document is compiled, and the briefing document includes background information, what is the problem, what do we already know about the problem, etc., etc. And that briefing document will then be sent to all agencies. And the agencies will have a look at that, and then we will, a couple of days later, we will invite them to a briefing session where we allow them to ask questions and to have a discussion and so on. And in that meeting, we will say, okay, which agency will take the lead? So then the creative agency would go and develop a creative idea and the advertising around that. And once that has been signed off, that will be placed in newspapers, magazines, television, radio, and so on. Whilst the creative agency is doing the creative work, the media buying agency is doing a strategy as to how we best will connect, because the briefing document will state very clearly who is the target market. And the media buying agency will then go through the research, and their access to research and their experience will then find the most suitable tools to connect with those specific target audience. So they will provide us with a media plan or connection plan, and we will sign that off. And it is in detail as to when the advert will appear on Highveld or on 702 or whatever, as well as an overall plan in terms of the cost.
1 second. Thank you. You may proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pretorius, you say in your affidavit that particularly important for Eskom is frequency and reach.
Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, it's not just for Eskom, so it is for most marketers. So frequency is how often does the advert appear on television or on radio or in a newspaper or magazine. So the frequency is I can't place an advert once in one newspaper and expect that I have now have awareness around the specific issue. So the frequency is quite important. The reach is also important in terms of connecting with the right people. So if I want to talk to people in LSM 1, 2, or 3, and I'm using cinema, then I'm not going to connect with those people because they don't go to cinema.
And you mentioned that research plays an important part of determining that. What sort of indicators are used by the media buying agencies to determine your reach?
Media buying agency will look obviously at the circulation of the newspaper, and Eskom has a policy that we only deal with accredited publications that have been audited. So or viewership or listenership. So it's not just about newspapers. So we will look at the circulation. We will also look at the behavioral aspects around the target market in terms of the media. So there is media research that's being done on a continuous basis and the media agency has access to that. So they will be able to tell you how many people have read the U in the last 7 days, who have watched Survivor on television the last 7 days, and so on. So that has an impact. Also, the popularity of the program, television specifically, popularity of the program will also determine the price of the advertising. So sometimes it may be the best option, but it's not cost effective. So all of that research is then put together in a strategy document, and the strategy document is then presented to the client, and the client says, well, yes, we agree, or no, we don't agree, we'd like this, or we'd like that, or we'll ask for more money in order to do this or that. But eventually the strategy document is signed off by the client, and from the strategy document, the connection plan is then developed, which is then translated into a buying plan.
And Mr. Pretorius, you said that Eskom has a policy of not dealing with publications that are not accredited. What is the process for accreditation?
Well, it's the publication itself, or the television station or the radio station itself needs to apply to the ABI, the Audited Bureau of, no, sorry.
I believe it's circulations.
ABC, sorry, Audited Bureau of Circulations. My apologies. They would apply, and their research will be done by them. Audit will be done by them in terms of readership, circulation, sorry.
And given the process that you've described, would you regard it as unusual if Eskom entered into a long-term contract or spent a significant sum of money with a media publication about which there was little or no market research?
Yes, it would be very unusual.
And so can you explain how or whether Eskom would ever support small media publications or new entrants, which perhaps didn't have this market research about them?
We do, and we do so cautiously. So we won't enter, as your previous question, go into a long-term agreement with a lot of money. So we'll start small and help build a publication with other marketers in South Africa. And once the publication is audited and the circulation figures are up to standard and so on, then we would support a publication.
Thank you. And Mr. Pretorius, the last aspect on the agencies I'd appreciate your assistance with is remuneration. How do you pay the media agencies? How are they remunerated by Eskom?
By Eskom?
Yes.
Eskom pays them a fee. So we would determine from all the strategic marketing initiatives, we will determine how much the budget would be. And from that budget, we would pay them between 3% and 5% is their fee that they get paid to do the work, and they provide us with a resource plan according to that 5%, whatever. So you will have the business unit director. You don't need every single day. So you may have 50%. The strategist may use occasionally, so you will have 5% of the strategist's time.
And I understand that the agencies then also obtain a rebate from what you describe as the media owner, i.e. the media publication. Can you explain how that works?
Okay, so up until very recently, there was a 16.5% rebate, which is a commission that is paid to the agency for bringing the business, similar to a car salesman who sells a car who earns commission. So that 16.5% can be used by organizations to pay the agency and say the commission, the 16.5% is what you earn. Or alternatively, is like I did in Eskom's case, that made it more cost effective for me, is to pay them a fee and then take the 16.5% paid back to Eskom. And that 16.5% is then used to pay their fee, and it's used to pay the creative agency's fees, and the balance is reinvested, in the campaign. So the 16.5% was a standard, but recently the Competition Commission said that it's uncompetitive, therefore the agencies can now, or the media owners, can now determine their own commissions.
Thank you. How recently was that?
I think it's within the last 6 months.
Okay. Can we then move on to the issue of sponsorship? You deal with that at your affidavit from paragraph 23 on page 6. Can you begin by explaining to us what a sponsorship agreement is and how it differs from advertising in the ordinary course?
Yes, sponsorship is, well, firstly, it's a commercial transaction between an organization and the sponsorship property owner. This sponsorship property owner will come to you and say, I have this property, which is, and I'm just going to use the rugby as an example because it's relevant now. The Absa Bank that sponsors the rugby, they will do so because there's a commercial benefit for them. They either get more clients or they get more business through this. So there's a commercial benefit to that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that for every R1 that you sponsor, you must have at least R3 to leverage that sponsorship, to tell the world that I'm sponsoring. And that you do commercials during break times, when it's halftime, you do commercials or squeeze backs on television and so on. So that sponsorship agreement then very clearly spells out the role of the sponsor. In other words, in this case, in this example, Absa Bank, what is their role? What are they to provide? Clearly spells that out, and it also clearly spells out the responsibilities of the property owner, what they need. So South African Rugby needs to provide this, and this. And these two things are measured at the end of the day, and on the sponsorship from something like an Absa Bank would be what is the commercial benefit at the end of the day.
Okay. And can you describe for us what process must be followed before a sponsorship agreement is entered into, and how that differs from advertising through a media buying agency, for example?
Okay, in Eskom, we have a sponsorship desk. So all sponsorships that are received, doesn't matter where it comes from in the organization, is supposed to be sent to the sponsorship desk first. That's the first port of call. There is a specific criteria in which a sponsorship is measured against for Eskom, and this is developed with the cooperation of Exco and as part of the policy document, so it's signed off within the organization. And that, if the sponsorship is measured and it scores about 75% and above, it may be recommended to go to the sponsorship committee for approval, provided that there's budget. So if I get a sponsorship for a environmental conference, I would go to the environmental manager within Eskom or the sustainability department and say, are you interested in sponsoring this, and is this a particular important stakeholder for you, and so on. They may say yes, and they may say they have the budget, and then we will take it to the sponsorship committee, and the presentation and submission documents will be done, and then it would be approved. Once the sponsorship committee has approved it, we still need to enter into a contract with the sponsorship owner, the property owner, in order to make sure that the responsibilities are spelled out and that we are protected and so on. We then also sit down with them before we conclude the contract and negotiate the benefits. What is the benefits that we as an organization will derive from this association with you as a sponsorship owner? And then the contract is concluded and signed, and the sponsorship then goes ahead.
You've mentioned the sponsorship committee. What is that, and where in the organization does it fit?
Okay, originally up until very recently, last year, the Corporate Affairs Division MANCO fulfilled the role of the sponsorship committee as well as the management committee. Sorry, and your question further was, where is it positioned? It is currently a subcommittee of the Corporate Affairs MANCO with its own terms of reference, its own chairman, and has been in operation for almost a year now.
Thank you. Can we just go to the sponsorship policy very briefly? That's
Yes.
at page 65 of your bundle. It's Annexure 2. You've dealt in your affidavit with the various criteria that are applied and the objectives sought to be achieved, and I don't intend to go to those in the policy. Can we begin just by with you confirming that this same policy, which is dated 2000 and revised in 2001, was still in force in 2012?
It was, yes, because there was no new policy. My understanding is that
I'm sorry. Can we just get the witness to confirm that the policy starts from what page to what page?
Yes, Chair. Can you confirm that the policy begins at page 65? And that it ends together with its annexures at page 116? Sorry, 115.
15. Yes. That's what
Okay.
the annexes.
Okay. And that's a policy on
Sponsorship, Jay.
sponsorships. Okay.
Could we turn to page 67?
I'm just looking
Apologies, Chair.
here. I had expected a cover page that would have big words, sponsorship policy or something like that. So, but they are not there, but it's okay, the witness has confirmed.
Could we turn to page 67?
Yes,
And at clause 4.1, scope of approval.
yes.
Could you just explain to us in what circumstances a sponsorship agreement would need to go to the sponsorship committee?
All sponsorships, anything above 50,000 Rand has to go to the sponsorship committee. Anything below 50,000 Rand can be approved by the relevant executive. However, the sponsorship committee should still be informed of that sponsorship that has been made.
And if you turn the page onto 68,
Yes,
it says at A, it says the management board may approve sponsorships up to and including an amount of 10 million rand, and that sponsorships exceeding 10 million rand may only be approved by the Electricity Council. Can you explain to us what the management board and the Electricity Council are?
that was during the time, Chair, when Eskom was still the Electricity Supply Commission. So we had the Electricity Council, which is the equivalent of the board now, and we had the management board, which is the equivalent of EXCO at this stage.
So the policy had been prepared during those days, and it has not been amended to accurately reflect current structures.
Chair, it has been amended, but it was never signed off. So
Yes.
there is currently a new policy in place,
Yes.
which is not relevant to this period of what we're talking.
Yes.
But since this policy, we have had many attempts to update the policy, but for various reasons, it was not updated
Yes.
and not signed. So
Yes.
my understanding was then, in that case, we refer to the last signed
Yes.
policy.
Yes. Okay.
And can we turn to clause 4.2, which says that executive directors will ensure budget provision within their groups to fund those sponsorship initiatives which they wish to invest in?
Yes.
what's your understanding of the requirement of that provision?
So a lot of the executive directors at that stage, the board members were then referred to as executive directors, had the notion that the marketing department will have this massive amount of money for sponsorships. And we only had funding for sponsorships that was of corporate interests, like, for instance, the Eskom Expo for Young Scientists and so on. So individual or niche sponsorships that people wanted to do, they needed to fund from their own budgets. We didn't carry the budget, and that's what that refers to.
Okay. And then the last aspect of the policy I'd like to turn to, which is not addressed in your affidavit, is at page 109. That is Annexure 5 to the sponsorship policy, and it's headed Measuring the Sponsorship. And it runs from 109 to 112. Can you just explain to us what the requirements of the sponsorship policy are in relation to the monitoring and evaluation of the sponsorship agreements that Eskom enters into?
Well, simply put, it is if you have put X amount of money into a sponsorship property, you would want to see the return on the investment. So, as I've mentioned before, there's a contract. The contract contains certain performance clauses for both parties, and have those performance clauses been met? Have we reached the target audience, and so on? It is always advantageous for an organization to have a long-term relationship with a sponsorship property. If we take in South Africa, for instance, the rugby, the soccer, the Nedbank Golf Challenge, it's long-term relationships, so it's better to have a long-term relationship. So if one sponsors something for the first time, the performance assessment that one does on the sponsorship afterwards is very important, because it also determines, do we want to continue to do this or not?
Thank you. So having regard to this policy and the process that you've described, would it be unusual for Eskom to enter into a sponsorship agreement without going through the sponsorship committee, or the CAD Manco as it was?
It would be unusual, yes.
And without applying any of the criteria set out in the sponsorship policy?
That would be very wrong.
And would it be unusual after entering into such an agreement for there to be no monitoring or evaluation as to the success or the impact of the sponsorship?
It would be unusual, not a norm.
Thank you. I'd like now to turn to the...
Are you able to indicate what the frequency may have been prior to the New Age era of such unusual features? In other words, deviations from what you expected to happen.
Chair, since I took over in 2007, 2008, there has not been any, apart from the New Age.
Yes, and prior to that, would you have known if there were any by virtue of the position you occupied then?
Yes, Chair, because our financial business partner would do a check on the general ledger account for sponsorships. So we will see if anybody in the business has spent any money on sponsorship on the general ledger account number, and then those would be addressed. If had not been gone through the proper process, it would also then constitute a condemnation in such instances.
And are you able to recall any instances prior to 2007 when this had occurred, namely these deviations, this failure to do what would have been usual?
Chair, I cannot recall.
You can't recall?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Pretorius, can we then turn to what is really the focus of today's evidence, which is the contracts entered into between Eskom and the New Age. And Chair, can I just say that during the course of this, I'll be referring to TNA and the New Age interchangeably. TNA Media was the entity that owned the New Age newspaper. Mr. Pretorius, we pick that up from paragraph 29 of your affidavit, where you say that you first became aware of an approach to Eskom by TNA on the 22nd of March 2011, when Mr. Jacques Roux contacted Mr. Chose Chweu.
Yes,
Who is Mr. Chose Chweu?
he was my divisional executive who I reported to.
And Mr. Jacques Roux?
Mr. Jacques Roux was from, well, allegedly from the New Age, and I say allegedly because his email address was not DNA, it was JIC.
Okay. Can we turn to that email correspondence? It's at page 117. It is annexure 3 to your affidavit.
Yes.
And if we start from the bottom, Mr. Jacques Roux contacts Mr. Chose Chweu, and as you say, Mr. Jacques Roux's email address is JIC. Do you know what JIC is?
No, I would have to guess. I'm assuming it's some other mining house.
And Mr. Roux says, Dear Chose, pursuant to our telephonic conversation, we request a meeting during the week if possible to introduce the New Age newspaper to you. I attach here to a brief overview of the product for your perusal and asks for a meeting at your convenience, at Mr. Chweu's convenience. Further up, Mr. Chweu then forwards that to Ms. Raisa Wadja, copying Jacques Roux and you, and says, please find time to meet with Jacques Roux. Who is Ms. Wadja?
She's a colleague. She runs the corporate communications department, which is internal and external communication.
And how did you understand Mr. Chweu's email to Ms. Wadja?
Well, because I was just copied, I accepted that is for information only. Ms. Wadja had met with Jacques Roux and then realized that this is not in her area, it should be in my area, so she referred Mr. Roux to me.
And can we turn to the proposal that's attached to Mr. Roux's affidavit? That's at page 119. And I don't intend to go through the whole thing, but if we could turn to page 124. And there, the proposal says that the New Age was launched on the 6th of December 2010, and that it is currently distributing over 100,000 copies per day. How would you have verified whether that statement was true?
We would have checked that with ABC.
Okay. And was the New Age accredited with ABC?
No, they were not.
Do you know whether they had ever applied for accreditation with ABC?
Mr. Hoa informed me at some point that they have, but we have not, until its demise, we have not seen the certificate from ABC.
Okay. Chair, we have obtained an affidavit from ABC, which confirms that TNA never applied for accreditation.
Okay.
I can take you to that affidavit. It's at page 752. It's in bundle MM1B. So
Yes.
the second file containing
Yes.
Mr. Pretorius's annexures. And it simply confirms that TNA never
Yeah.
applied for and was never granted certification.
Okay.
We've simply included the affidavit because we don't understand this to be a contentious point.
Yes.
But of course, Chair, we do so provisionally, and if any dispute arises in due course, we'll deal with that appropriately.
Yes, no, that's fine. So I think for present purposes, it's enough to just identify where it is to be found, and you have said what it says in substance, and we don't need to go beyond that.
Thank you, Chair.
Well, if you want to read if it's a paragraph or something, that's fine.
It's not necessary, Chair.
Yeah.
It literally says what I've
Yes,
just
okay,
described.
okay.
Mr. Pretorius, can we then return to your affidavit? And to paragraph 32. where you say that a meeting did happen with Mr. Roo. Do you know if Ms. Wadja attended that?
No, she didn't.
Okay. Do you know who attended?
I was there, Mr. John McArdle, who worked for me at that time, and my immediate GM, Mr. Kepe Moremi.
Sorry, Mr. Pretorius, I think you're referring to a subsequent meeting, which I'm going to get to shortly.
Oh, sorry.
This is a meeting that followed immediately from the correspondence I'm referring to, and you indicated paragraph 32 that you understand the meeting took place as scheduled, but you did not attend.
I do apologize. I did not, I could not attend the first meeting. I'm not sure. I think it was in April. I may have been on leave. So John McArdle would have stood in for me or acted on my behalf, and he attended that meeting.
Mr. McArdle attended the meeting. And who is Mr. McArdle?
He was the corporate marketing manager who reported to me, and has subsequently retired 4 years ago, I think, 3 years ago.
Okay. And now we can move on to the subsequent meeting which occurred, which you described from paragraph 33. And you say that Mr. McArdle was contacted by a TNA representative. Can you describe what took place at that meeting?
It was SABC, the TNA came, and the same proposal that we've just looked at for the new age breakfast, and that Eskom should be part of that.
I'm sorry, I may have missed this. Can you cover who requested the meeting, what was the purpose of the meeting, and then before going into the contents of the discussion of the meeting?
Of course, Jay. The request came from the TNA, to have a meeting with the Eskom, and the objective of the meeting was to discuss the proposal.
Okay, thank you.
And what was the proposal at that point?
It's a proposal that we had looked at, so it was specifically for the new age breakfasts that they wanted Eskom to sponsor.
And can you just describe for us broadly what these breakfasts were?
Okay, so the breakfasts.
I'm sorry. I know you said, Mr. Magilla, you were not going to spend much time on the proposal, but if that's the proposal that was the subject of the discussion at the meeting, let us have the important features of the proposal before we go into the meeting. I assume that the proposal was given to you ahead of the meeting? Or not really?
Chair, I don't recall, but I would assume it would have been.
Or is your recollection that you got it at the meeting?
Chair, I really cannot recall. My
Chair,
boss.
can I try to assist?
Yes.
The proposal that I referred to
Yes.
you to a moment ago is
Yeah.
in fact a proposal only for advertising.
Okay.
That proposal, as far as I understand, doesn't contain any proposal for business breakfasts.
Oh, okay.
It was a proposal. If you are interested.
No, we can look at it at the time that you think is right. I thought that it was going to be the subject of the discussion of the meeting that he's going into now.
Yes, Chair, as far as I am aware, there was no proposal circulated in respect of business breakfasts before that meeting.
No, that's
but I do understand that that business breakfasts formed part of the discussion
Yes.
at that meeting.
Okay, no, that's fine. Let's go ahead. You said the purpose of the meeting was to discuss a proposal.
Yeah, a proposal from the new age.
From the new age.
So my understanding was that it was to discuss advertising, and then when Jacques Roux came, it was advertising and the business breakfasts.
Yes, okay.
And sorry, where we left off, Mr. Pretorius, is I asked you just to give a sort of broad description of what these business breakfasts were.
So the proposal included a breakfast at one of the hotels in the city, with SABC's morning live program being broadcasted live from the venue to for an additional hour. So they are from 6 to 8, so it was from 7 to 9, was specifically the business breakfast. The TNA then sold tickets to the event, so people that wanted to attend had either had to buy corporate tables or single seats at these events, and they would then, according to New Age, they would also then promote the business breakfast through the newspaper, the New Age, and allegedly SABC would also promote it on radio and on their website. They would be promote and advertise that the business breakfast with whoever the celebrity or minister or whoever it was would be, and then they would sell tickets for that.
And what was it that it was being proposed Eskom would do?
It was proposed that Eskom would sponsor the breakfast initially for 1 million rand a breakfast.
Okay, thank you. Chair, I see that we have reached 11:15. It might be an appropriate
Yes.
time for the tea adjournment.
We'll take the tea adjournment and we'll resume at 11:30. We adjourn.
All rise.
breakfast shows. Is that right?
Yes, Chair.
Also for advertising in the New Age?
Yes, Chair.
And it was at that meeting where you took the position that you have just described?
What my position was, sorry, Chair.
At the meeting?
At the meeting, was that no, we will not take you up on your offer or your proposal. But I did say, because you're a new entrant into the market, that we will give some advertising budget towards the New Age. I didn't confirm any amount at that point in time, because I needed to discuss it with the team. Just maybe for the Chair to understand that although I'm the head of marketing, there's marketing project managers that execute each one of these strategic marketing initiatives.
Yes.
And as a manager, I don't prescribe to them what publications they need to go in. I am assuming they are qualified and they make the decisions based on this. I will check it from time to time and I will step in. And if they don't meet their targets, then obviously they get penalized for that. So I would not have made a commitment to Mr. Roux at that meeting with regards to any advertising amount. So that was, in my opinion, the end of the meeting. And the feedback, because Mr.
And in relation to that, what was their response, the New Age people? What did they say to that? If you are able to remember.
Chair, if I was to give you my opinion, it would be
you can't remember.
I can't really remember.
Yes.
I think I remember, but I'm not sure.
Yes, but there was simply no agreement.
There was no agreement.
Yes, and then on the breakfast show, what did you convey to them?
I said
yes.
absolutely no, we won't, and we didn't commit to anything.
And did they seem to accept that, or you can't remember what their attitude was?
Yeah, I can't remember it was just Jacques there.
Yes.
From the New Age.
Yes.
So we said no. I can't remember really what his reaction was.
But there was just no agreement.
Yes.
You indicated that in principle, Eskom could give them some advertising as so far as they are a new publication,
Yes.
But you didn't commit yourself to any amount.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. Pretorius, as I understand your evidence, earlier you said that the way in which Eskom would often deal with smaller publications or new entrants was to offer smaller deals.
Yes, absolutely.
So let's now turn to what happens after the meeting.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Mbigwa. So at the meeting, you have no recollection whether the New Age delegation tried to persuade Eskom that there was value for Eskom in sponsoring the breakfast shows?
Chair, they did.
They did try.
They did, but they didn't convince me.
Yes. You couldn't see where the value, what value there would be.
Yeah, I couldn't see, and I've been a marketer for almost 30 years.
Yes, yes.
And from what they were offering, it didn't make sense to me.
Yes.
Where would my R1 million be going if you're selling tickets?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pretorius, you then say that you communicate these concerns to Mr. Chwe.
Well, it wasn't concerns at that point in time. It was feedback. If you recall the email that was sent to Raisa and then subsequently to me, as my, I was reporting to Kepe Moreme, Mr. Kepe Moreme, who was the general manager who reported to Mr. Cheo. At that point, I gave feedback to Mr. Cheo, said we have met with New Age as per your instruction, and we are not going to take them up on their offer, but we will offer them some advertising. And I can't assume for Mr. Cheo, but I assumed that this was the end of the story, but it was not.
And then from paragraph 36 of your affidavit from page 11, you say that you communicated these concerns, or not concerns, this feedback to Mr. Chwe, and that he told you to conclude the contract because an instruction had come, and that's what you were getting to next.
Okay, so after the feedback meeting to Mr. Cheu, the New Age had not gone away. The New Age had met with Mr. Cheu in his office, Nazim Hawa, and there was one other person, her name.
Well, you can look at in your statement if that will refresh your memory.
Yeah, Mr. Hawa and I can't remember the second person's name that was there. They had met with Mr. Cheu, and I was invited to the meeting, and the discussion was about the business breakfasts again. I again expressed my concerns around this. I was asked to leave, and then Mr. Cheu, we had the discussion where I raised the concerns, and he said to me, Peter, it is an instruction. It comes from the minister. Brian Dames had told us that you will do this. And I arrogantly...
Let's go back to the meeting. Who asked you to leave the meeting?
Mr. Hawa, from the New Age.
Oh, was it his place to ask you to leave?
Not in my opinion.
Yes. And Mr. Cheu, he didn't protest at that?
No.
Yes. And are you able to say what may have prompted Mr. Howard to want you to leave?
I can only assume, Chair, that it was because I was against the business breakfast and I did not want to spend the money.
You had already expressed that view by when he asked you to leave.
Yes.
At the meeting, at that stage, had Mr. Cheu also expressed his view where he stood on the issue, or not yet? Or you can't remember?
Mr. Cheu's style has always been that this is the head of marketing, and he will make the decision and he will give you feedback. So,
yes.
I was giving feedback, and directly after that, Mr. Hawa just looked at me, and then he said to Mr. Cheu, if I remember correctly, I can't remember the exact words, we have other business to discuss. And then he turned to me and he said, Mr. Pretorius, you may excuse yourself.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. And you say that Mr. Cheu communicated to you that the instruction had come from the minister.
Yes. Well, that was implied. So it came from the top, and there were subsequent emails where some of the minister's staff was copied on the New Age discussions that we were having, and some of those staff members' Gmail accounts were used. So it was clear to me that this was an instruction. Mr. Cheu had spoken to Mr. Dames, and Mr. Dames had said, the minister said, you will do this.
So Mr. Cheu communicated to you that Mr. Dames had communicated to him that the minister had said that you will do this?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay.
And who was the minister at the time?
Minister Malusi Gigaba.
Chair, as Ms. Hofmeyr referred to earlier, we have received an affidavit from Mr. Gigaba
Yes.
in response to the 3-3 notice that he received. Can I ask you to go to that affidavit? It's at page 776 in file MM1B.
Seven.
776. And if I can ask you to turn in particular to page 778, at paragraph 7. before that, Mr. Gigaba effectively summarizes the allegation that's made. And he says, I deny that I ever gave any such instruction. Such would amount to me, as a representative of a state shareholder, interfering with the operational matters of Eskom, which I never did. What do you say to that?
I disagree with the Honourable Minister because he had interfered in the operations of the business on many occasions, on many other things as well. There would be no plausible reason for Mr. Damas or Mr. Chehu to force me to go into a contract other than an instruction from somebody higher up. And the Honourable Minister is saying that he denies that he gave such an instruction, saying that would be interfering with the operational matters of Eskom, which I never did. That statement is not true because Mr. Gigaba had often, especially when we went through load shedding and various other things, Mr. Gigaba was there.
Is your evidence that you can't say for sure whether he gave the instructions that you were told about, the instruction that you were told about, but that you have no reason not to believe what you were told by Mr. Mshwe, who said he had been told by Mr. Damas that the minister had given instruction, but that you are saying, to the extent that the minister says he would never interfere in operational matters, you say, on that one, you say that's not true, that can't be true, because you know of many instances where he interfered in operational matters. Is that what you are saying, or are you saying something different?
Chair, that is what I'm saying, is that there was a lot of interference from the Department of Public Enterprises since the load shedding that started on the 24th of January 2008. DPE, or Department of Public Enterprises, had often come to Eskom and telling Eskom or instructing Eskom to do certain things. So you look at the coal contracts, which was also discussed. Some of the procurement issues and so on was discussed with the minister, and the minister had been part of the discussions.
And when you say minister, in this case, you're still referring to Mr. Gigaba?
Mr. Gigaba.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Pretorius, can we then move on to paragraph 8 of his affidavit, where he says that it also does not make sense that the fact that I was scheduled to be a guest speaker at a TNA breakfast of 12 April 2012 could serve as a reason for the TNA contract to be concluded. According to paragraph 37 of the Pretorius statement, I had already agreed to be the guest speaker, and clearly this had nothing to do with the conclusion of the TNA contract. I was not even aware of the negotiations between Eskom and TNA and or the SABC, which was the broadcaster of the TNA business breakfasts. What do you say to that?
Well, the minister was not aware that this negotiation. Remember that I pushed back on the contract with the New Age, and then we had to conclude the contract. So the minister would not have been aware that we are in the process of negotiating the first contract, and that we were in talks with the New Age. Secondly, the instruction came that he is the guest speaker and we should own that breakfast. So, because the minister can talk about energy efficiency and Eskom and the 49M campaign in that session. So yes, the fact that he already said yes to be the guest speaker had no bearing on our decision, because the decision or the instruction had already come that you will do it.
Indeed. And Mr. Pretorius, do I understand correctly, and this is, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but that the contract for the business breakfasts that Eskom signed was signed on the 13th of April, but in fact operated retrospectively from the beginning of the month?
Yes,
So that it did include Mr. Gigaba's
it did.
business breakfast?
It did, yes.
Can we then move to paragraphs 39 and 40 of your affidavit, and this is where you begin to talk about the conclusion of the first contract with TNA. This is at page 11 of your affidavit.
Yes,
And you say that Mr. Chweu contacted you, asking you to meet with Mr. Roux to, quote, close the deal.
yes.
Can we go to that correspondence? That's at page 131 of the same bundle.
Yes.
And I'd like us to start from the earliest part of this correspondence, which appears at the bottom of page 133. And at the bottom of page 133, Mr. Chweu emails you and Mr. Roux and says, please meet with Jacques so you could close the deal on the TNA 49M breakfasts as part of the Minister's national campaign. Can you explain what 49M is and the Minister's national campaign?
So 49M, at the time of the load shedding, there was Eskom's reputation took a huge knock, and there was also very little credibility within the brand. So with the creative agency at that time, we sat down and we developed a strategy. How could we put something between Eskom and the public that can talk to the public, because we still needed to talk to the public to save electricity and so on. So the agency came up, at that stage we were 49 million South Africans in the country, and that's the 49M campaign. That's what it stood for. The Deputy President, Honorable Malema, no, sorry, Motlanthe did the opening or the launch of the campaign. So we wanted the Deputy President's office to be the champion of the campaign, and he took the lead in that. The Minister played a role in the 49M campaign, in that I was also asked, and it's not part of this questioning, but I was also asked or instructed to include LSM 1, 2, and 3, and 4 in the campaign. We were specifically talking to high-end users, so in the residential market, so we were talking to LSM 8, 9, and 10, where the people have the money to waste electricity, they put on underfloor heating and so on and so on. So our primary market was not LSM 1, 2, 3, and 4. But the Minister wanted to meet with these people, and we had organized various roadshows to various traditional townships within the country to promote 49M. And that's why this is part of the Minister's, the comment of the Minister's national campaign.
Please enlighten me, Mr. Pretorius, on LSM. What?
Oh, sorry, my
I don't know
apologies.
much about it, as you might think I do.
My apologies, Chair.
Yes.
LSM is living lifestyle measurement. So it's it's done by SARF, the South African Research Foundation. They measure the various aspects of the population. So LSM 1 would be the poorest of the poor. So they are able, if you buy the LSM documentation, you will be able to determine where they live, how they live, what's their average income, what they own, and so on and so on. So, and then going to the middle classes is 5, 6, 7, and 4, 5, and 6. The middle classes, what they own, what electricity equipment they have in the house, and so on. And that's why that was quite important to us. So when we did our research as to the consumption was obviously sitting in LSM 8, 9, and 10, who are the wealthy people in the country.
Okay, no, thank you.
And as I understand your earlier point, because higher income users tend to be higher users of electricity, the 49M was initially directed at the higher income earners according to the LSM measure.
The 49M campaign, as by its name, was to include the whole of South Africa to create a national movement in order to declare war on electricity wastage. That was the main aim. But the primary target audience for the launch of the campaign was LSM 8, 9, and 10.
Okay. If we can then return to the correspondence that we were at page 133.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius, I'm just interested in the high use of electricity by the high income earners. What would be the difference? I mean, a lot of people in what you may regard as, you would put it, LSM, low LSMs, you know, have television sets, and they use electricity to cook. And I'm sure some have, you know, music systems and so on. So I'm just interested in, apart from businesses, in terms of home, what would be the type of things that the high earners do which are unlikely to be done in terms of electricity, by the low SMMs people, other than that maybe high earners might have 3 or 4 television sets in the same house, whereas maybe the people in the lower category might have one.
Chair, the answer to this is twofold. One is that it's behavioral. So although you refer to the lower LSMs having television, music sets, and also using maybe a 2-plate electric stove to cook on and so on, the attitudinal or the behavioral aspect of those people are already in a savings mode because they are not high earners in terms of salary. So I have to make a choice. Do I send my child to school or do I cook?
Yes, okay.
So they
care more about saving.
Exactly.
And therefore, with regard to electricity, they would be trying to use it minimally.
Especially because of the price and so on.
Yes,
So they would already be frugal. To answer the second part of the question, Chair, where you asked what does the higher LSM have that the lower LSM doesn't have? Yes, you are quite right. They might have 3 or 4 television sets. They have dishwashers, which you will not find in the lower LSM. They have automatic washing machines, tumble dryers, underfloor heating, swimming pools, and so on. So for us, for Eskom in particular, at that point in time, was the peak period in the afternoon. So from 5 to 8, 5 to 9 was the peak period. So we didn't want those people with the swimming pools and so on, and the automatic washing machines, and during winter to switch on all these stuff during peak time, because it created a problem for Eskom. Because that's when we ran out of capacity and that we had to go into load shedding as a last resort.
Well, I guess also true would be that because they are wealthy, the question of the cost might not be a big thing to them.
Chair,
compared to people at lower levels?
So, Chair, the research that we did specifically after the 2008 and to set ourselves up to deal with load shedding, because remember it was a long-term issue that we had to deal with as a country. So the research that we had done is we looked at convenience factor, cost, and the environment. Sadly, the environment did not score very high. People didn't want to save electricity to save the environment. They didn't want to. There was very few people that made the connection, and only in the higher LSM. In the lower LSM, there was no appetite for saving for environment. The cost element was at the lower LSM, and at the higher LSM was the convenience factor. I have money. You're supposed to supply electricity, so supply me with electricity. I'm not cutting back, and I have the money to pay for it. So that was the attitude that the higher LSMs had at that point in time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pretorius, can we then return to the correspondence at page 133?
Yes.
In response to Mr. Chweyo's email, if we move up the page, Mr. Roo responds, thanks Mr. Chweyo for suggesting the meeting, and asks when you would be available. And then further up the page, you respond to him and you say, hi Jacques, perhaps in preparation for our meeting, you could put a sales proposal together. Now, that suggests that by that point you hadn't received a sales proposal.
We had received a sales proposal that was one-sided. So the proposal that they came and saw us with the breakfasts and the advertising was in there. But subsequent to that, as I said, there's many meetings that have taken place across with Mr. Cheo and Mr. Owa. My apologies. And so we were at a different point in that, and I had a budget in mind, which I got from Mr. Cheo, to say how much we should be spending with the new age. So that's why I asked him for a sales proposal.
Yes.
Because now we had two components in this document. We had the sponsorship component and we had the advertising component.
And in this email, you ask that he provide some sort of discount or added value if you're going to enter into a 12-month sponsorship.
Yes. My middle name is added value.
If we can
So
then,
this is at a time when you were now basically carrying out the instruction that you were told had been given.
Yes.
That's okay.
and Chair, if I can ask a follow-on question from that, is your understanding from Mr. Chweyo's email at the bottom of the page of close the deal, that you must go ahead and sign the contract?
Yes.
If we then turn to page 132, at the bottom, Mr. Roo says that they have kept 4 breakfasts open for Eskom to sponsor.
Yes.
And then in the middle of the page, Mr. Chweyo responds to Mr. Roo. And he says that the 49M breakfast that we are proposing here are the breakfasts that would be aligned to the Minister's 49M national campaign. And he asks for the breakfasts to be specifically styled in the 49M style, design.
I think I've lost you, Mr.
I apologize, Chair. We're on page 132. It's my fault. I didn't indicate.
Yes.
When we get to correspondence, we need to work backwards in order to go in chronological order.
Yes.
So I started on page 130.
You can rest assured I know that part.
We started on page 133, and we are now on page 132.
Yes,
And I'm in the
okay.
middle of the page. I'm looking at Mr. Chweyo's email.
Okay.
And I see there that someone by the name of Mr. Mzwandile Radebe is copied,
Yes.
Who is that?
It would be Radebe,
Radebe.
Mr.
Apologies, Chair.
Radebe.
Mr. Radebe, Mzwandile Radebe was working directly with the minister and was a liaison between us and the minister. I am not sure what his official title and role was at DPE, but he was not the head of communication. So it would be unusual for us, for my department, because I'm not responsible for stakeholder engagement, to engage with anybody else at DPE other than the head of communication.
And when you referred earlier to people within the minister's office being copied on correspondence, were you referring to an email
I was
such as
referring
this?
to Mr. Radebe because instructions came from him verbally. I just wanted to mention actually earlier that, and it relates to a question that the chair asked earlier, that unfortunately I did arrogantly ask for this to be put in writing, because I will not execute this if it's not in writing.
Yes.
I never received any of the instructions in writing.
Now, your request for this to be in writing, was it directed at Mr. Shehu?
Yes.
Yes. Did he promise to give it in writing? He didn't.
He did.
As far as you remember, he didn't.
No.
But you never received a written instruction.
Neither did we receive written instruction from Mr. Damas.
Yes.
So we were sort of caught in the middle of this. And this is when Mr. Roux starts copying Mzwandile. Mzwandile was giving instructions to everybody, to the chairs of the various state-owned entities, the CEs, to us. So Mzwandile asked us to put a pink pillar on the minister's chair. We had to do it. We had no questions asked, you just do it. And if you didn't do it, then he reported you to the minister. So that made it very incredibly difficult for us to operate as an independent state-owned entity.
I guess that a lot of what Mr. Pretorius may have to say about such instructions might come out in the other phase that Ms. Hofmeyer talked about, where I could be told more about some of those things.
Indeed, Chair.
Yes. So I'm just mentioning, Mr. Pretorius, in case anybody might wonder why we are not probing into some of the things we are mentioning, that Ms. Hofmeyer did say that there will be another phase where some of the Eskom witnesses will come back and then deal with other matters.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, okay.
Understand.
Thank you.
Then, Mr. Pretorius, if we can go further up the correspondence, Mr. Roux then thanks you for the update, says it's an exciting opportunity that they'll be willing to explore with you, and then suggests that you close the initial deal of the 4 breakfasts first this week.
Yes.
If you then turn over to page 131, Mr. Treyu there says that you'll be working with Peter, that's you, and Kepe, who's that?
It's Mr. Maremi, my GM, General Manager, that I reported to directly.
Okay. And then the correspondence ends towards the top of the page with a meeting scheduled for the next day. Do you recall if that meeting took place?
Yes.
And what occurred at that meeting?
That's where Mr. Roux came and presented the proposal to us. It was still about the business breakfast and some advertising. And I said to him that we will have a look at it and come back to him on that.
And how did the proposal at this point differ from the previous meeting that you had?
If I remember correctly, that there was the advertising spend was much higher than what we were willing to spend, and from the previous proposals. And this had 4 breakfasts in. They were talking about 4 breakfasts for Eskom, which later then changed to 6, because Mr. Roux had indicated that they'd sold all the other breakfasts. So there's only 4 left, and he kept those specifically for Eskom. However, 2 of the breakfasts were added to the contract at a later stage.
And how did you respond at that meeting to the request?
So I said to Mr. Roux that I'll discuss it with my media agency. So I discussed it with Donald Lepoko, who was the business unit head at Media Shop, and I asked Donald, Mr. Lepoko, to come up with a proposal that is more palatable for Eskom.
Okay, let's just pause there. You mentioned the Media Shop. What's the Media Shop?
The Media Shop was our media buying agency
Right.
at the time.
And Mr. Dipoko?
He was working for Media Shop, and he was the business unit director on the Eskom business.
And did Mr. Dipoko express any reservations about the contract?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
He also agreed with me that it is not a good idea to go ahead with this. And I said to him, Donald, we have no choice. We have to do this.
And was it normal practice for a sponsorship agreement, which I understand the business breakfast component to be, to go through a media buying agency such as the Media Shop?
Well, not the sponsorship component, but this particular proposal contained an advertising component. So we said that because of that, we will put it through the Media Shop. The issue here, Chair, was that if we wanted to enter into an agreement, and this was my advice to Mr. Cheo at the time, if we enter into an agreement with the New Age, we might find the other media asking why were we not given an opportunity. And according to Eskom's procurement rules and regulations, that it should go out on open tender. But if I was to want to place an advert in the Sunday Times, because I've gone through open tender to appoint the media agency as the media buying agency, I would just say to Media Shop that we want to place an advert in the Sunday Times for a new chief executive or whatever the case may be. So that is different. But this New Age had a proposal which they believed, rightly or wrongly, that could help Eskom solve its problems. But we had not checked the market. So we would have, the prudent thing would have been to do an RFI, a request for information, first to test the market, and then decide on a process. That would have been the prudent thing. But because we didn't have a choice, I suggested that we add the advertising component and we do it through Media Shop.
Can I then ask you to turn to the next chain of correspondence? That's on page 139. It's Annexure 5. At the bottom of the page, and then of course it goes over to page 140. Mr. Roux contacts you and thanks you for your meeting, attaches a presentation of the event, as well as an estimate of the investment breakdown.
Yes.
You then, if we go further up on page 139, contact Mr. Dipoko.
Yes.
And you set out there a division of responsibilities.
Yes.
Can you explain that to us?
I wanted to ensure that the New Age takes care of that it is documented that they will take care of what they said in the proposal, which was a PowerPoint presentation. This was to be a contract that had needed to be signed, so that there's a clear, we understood that there's a division of duties and responsibilities, and that's why I'm saying what Eskom will do and what they are supposed to do. And
then if we go over to 138, Mr. Dipoko responds to you and says, Kepe has impressed on me the importance of finalizing this proposal with TNA, and he has committed 10 million rand to TNA.
Yes.
These interactions at this stage were in regard to both the New Age and the breakfast shows.
Yes. The advertising and the breakfast, yes.
The advertising and the breakfast shows.
Yes. Chair, perhaps to make that clear,
Yes.
if you go to page 142, that's the attachment to Mr. Dipoko's email at the top of 138. So on 142 is the breakdown of the proposed spend.
Yes.
Mr. Pretorius, could you just take us through this table and explain to us what here is the advertising and what is the business breakfast?
So the top part that talks about the Eskom programs, those are the various Eskom programs that we were running at the time. The Eskom Development Foundation, Energy Losses, Integrated Demand Management. Then we took a proportion that Mr. Zipoko took a percentage of the budget spent and then calculated the contribution to the 4 million rand that we were going to spend on advertising with the New Age. So you'll see right at the bottom, 49M, we had to contribute 20% because we had the highest budget, so we had to place 800,000 rands worth of advertising. So that's the first component. The second,
So just to pause you there, so in other words, the top 8 rows are all related to advertising?
yes, it is.
In the New Age newspaper?
Yes. So each of these program managers were made aware and said, this is, you are responsible to, or you must make sure that in your media plans you include New Age, and for the Eskom Development Foundation you need to spend 160,000 rand over the year.
Okay. And then let's move down to the where it reads brand 100%, and it gives a figure of 7.185 million.
That is for the business breakfast. So that was to talk to the brand, the 49M brand. Apologies.
And
I'm sorry, just explain that to me.
Sorry, Chair, that was
The brand part, what was to be done, why was it to be done, who was going to do it?
So this is the business breakfast. So the 7.2 million rand that we spent was to the sponsorship for the business breakfasts. So we would pay 1 million rand to New Age for the business breakfast. I'm not sure if I'm
To say for the business breakfast, what does that mean? For what exactly?
okay.
In terms of Eskom?
Okay, Chair, so for the format, I'm not sure if you're asking about the format of the business breakfast.
Well, I'm trying to understand what Eskom was going to get for that 7 million rand.
So we were going to get 6 breakfasts over the course of the year. The speakers at the breakfast was determined by the New Age, not by Eskom. So they would have a minister, and they would have a breakfast, and they would say, okay, Eskom has an opportunity, and then we or Transnet would take the opportunity to sponsor that breakfast. So the sponsorship then included that we would have branding in the venue. Exactly.
Pictures like this, difference is Eskom. It's written Eskom.
Well, it was 49M, Chair.
49M.
And New Age was a backdrop banner, exactly as that is behind you. And then we had opportunity to put up some pull-up banners. And then we had a opportunity to, the editor of the New Age always sort of opened the breakfast. And then Eskom an Eskom representative of EXCO or the chairman or the chief executive was given an opportunity to do a speech. But this was off air. It was not on air. So nobody other than the people in the venue heard this. Then breakfast was served, and then they went live to the SABC2 Morning Live. And then Mr. Ndoro would ask questions to the minister, whoever's there. Even then, the public then via Twitter and via the studio SMS line also asked questions, and Mr. Ndoro from SABC then asked those questions as well. The challenge that I had with all of this was that the minister, if it is the Minister of Water Affairs and Sanitation, that minister will not talk about 49M and energy efficiency. That minister will talk about her or his portfolio, not about energy efficiency. So for me, it didn't make sense to have that minister, because the message that I needed to get out was to get 49 million people to rally around energy efficiency. So once we've made the speech, the Eskom speech, and they went on air, we never as Eskom got the opportunity to talk about 49M and what it stands for and so on. There may have been, and I admit to that, there may have been the odd comment or question around 49M or energy efficiency from Mr. Ndoro, but it was not common practice.
But even before you get to whether it's somebody from Eskom, whether somebody from Eskom speaks to the people present, or his or her speech is broadcast on television, even before you get there, why would Eskom want to spend money? Maybe let's leave that part of speaking for now. Why would they spend such a lot of money for simply having these things at such breakfast, and even if they are shown on TV, and so what?
No, Chair, I can't answer that question. It didn't make sense to me either.
Yes, no, I mean, I know, I've read your statement, I know your difficulties with it. I mean, I could understand, maybe, I could understand that maybe if a private business wants to advertise their business and so on and so on, maybe it might make sense depending on what they pay for it. But Eskom is a state-owned entity.
Different brand.
Yes.
It was black and yellow.
Yes.
Eskom's corporate colors are blue.
Yes.
So the 49M logo, if you didn't have context around it, some people in the market research that we did at that time, some people thought it was a radio station.
Yes, well, I'm not surprised.
So we didn't have the opportunity to engage on 49M. Plus, if you look at the target market, the people that watch SABC Morning Live were also not our primary target market, because it goes up to LSM 6, and people that at 9 o'clock in the morning are still at home watching television are most probably economically inactive. So they are not part of the target market, and they are not the decision makers when it comes to what we pay or what we spend the money on. So for us as an organization, it would not, for me as a marketer and for us as an organization, that would not be sufficient. I would not pay R1 million for that. I would negotiate a completely different package. But as I've mentioned before, Chair, we were forced into this, and this was the format. And when there was a period during the New Age breakfast that the other media had complained about this and why is the new age and or state-owned entities in this transaction. The new age reaction to that was they wrote in the newspaper that the other newspapers are just jealous because they came up with this concept. But it wasn't true, because Mail and Guardian during COP17 had come up with exactly the same concept, which Eskom sponsored for 300,000 Rand at COP17 in Durban, where we had a far better brand exposure, and we had an opportunity to talk about our sustainability and environmental issues at that event. So if you take that as an example versus this as an example, it just simply makes no financial sense for Eskom to spend that kind of money on a breakfast. And then I know I'm jumping ahead, but Chair, then you also have to ask yourself the question, is if you're selling the seats, so I'm paying for my breakfast.
Yes, well, I was still coming there.
Oh,
Yeah, no, continue, because I'm looking at exactly what you pay 7 million or 1 million Rand per breakfast show for.
So the tables will be sold. So Eskom got 2 tables of 10, so that's 20 seats, and then two seats at the main table. Whoever the minister was that was there, we would have 2 seats there. Unfortunately, because of the reputation of the new age, which spread very quickly, you found it very difficult to get people to fill the tables. So some of the tables were filled by Eskom staff, and that defeats the object. But those tables, the rest of the people in the venue would pay for their
Their seats.
Yeah. So if one is financially astute, you would calculate the cost of the ticket, which will include those 20 seats that you're giving away for free, or 22 seats that you're giving away for free. You would include it in the cost of whatever a seat was. I can't remember how much it was. So they would sell those seats, which would pay for the breakfast, would pay for the venue hire, and table decorations if there was flower. I can't remember if there was flowers on the table and so on. But nothing elaborate, no elaborate breakfast. It was a normal kind of breakfast at 3, 4, 5-star hotel. So my question was, where does my R1 million go? Because it cannot go into the business breakfast, because you've already paid for that by selling tables and seats. So where does the R1 million go? Because this is Eskom money, it's public money, why is it going there? So that was my question, and I asked this question to Jacques, and I asked the same question to Mr. Houwa as well. I am yet to receive an answer.
And at that time, Mr. Cho, was he in agreement with your views about the breakfast shows and advertising on the new age, except that he said we are under instruction or something like that? Or did he have different views?
Mr. Chair has a different style, Chair, if I may. Mr. Chair always used the phrase, you need to manage your boss. So you need to manage upwards. So I needed to manage him, which I failed to do. But so Mr. Chair said, Peter, why make yourself sick by worrying about this? Because there's nothing you can do about this. So let's do this to the best of our ability, because this is what we have been instructed to do or told to do. So he has a different style in terms of that.
Yeah.
I think, and when Mr. Cheo testifies, you can check with him, but I think that Mr. Cheo had very similar views around this than what I have.
Okay, thank you. But even if the Eskom representative were to be allowed to speak and his or her speech was allowed, was broadcast, wouldn't the position be that if Eskom wanted to address the public about any issue of interest, such as load shedding, if they called a media conference, they could easily get that broadcast.
Yes, and we do, Chair.
Yes,
So if we call a media conference, I mean,
yes.
everybody attends, and it is lined with cameras in our
And you pay
auditorium.
nothing for it.
We pay nothing for it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm indebted for those questions because that traverses much of the ground I wanted to cover on value for money.
Okay, okay.
Just two residual issues on that score. The one is, Mr. Pretorius, do you know whether the New Age, as part of the costs you refer to, was paying for the broadcast, paying SABC to broadcast the show?
And my understanding, it was for free.
And you mentioned earlier that while it was broadcast on SABC2, the Morning Live show didn't target the LSM group that 49M was directed at, being the higher LSM groups. Chair, Mr. Pretorius has attached to his affidavit a presentation done by the media shop, which indicates that 28% of the viewers of Morning Live were from the higher LSMs of 8 to 10, and that 72% were from the lower ones. It's not necessary for us to go there.
Okay.
Oh. Ms. Hofmeyer reminds me that there is one important aspect of that presentation. It's at page 165 of MM1A.
Yes.
You see there that underneath the table, it says that in 2012, Morning Live had an average of 600,000 adults who viewed the program. The data that I just gave you, Chair, is immediately below that of the 28% in the higher
Yes, I can
higher
see that,
LSMs.
yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course, I don't know to what extent at that stage this might have been a factor, and namely illegal connections may have been an issue that may have needed to be attended to as well as part of saving electricity, but I don't know whether those who engage in illegal connections would have any incentive not to use electricity because they would not be paying for it anyway.
Chair, if I may refer you back to page 142 with the table that Mr. De Bocco had put together, you will see on that table that there's the second program from the top.
Yes.
Says energy losses program. So energy losses there's two types of losses in electricity: technical losses, so transmitting electricity over long distances, you lose electricity. That's why you have step-up transformers to step up the voltage again. So that's technical losses. Then non-technical losses includes everything that are illegal connections, ghost vending, whatever you can think of is part of that. And then just underneath integrated demand management is a program called public safety. Public safety is a legal requirement for Eskom that we have to inform the public of the dangers of electricity so that people don't climb pylons and touch wires and so on and so on. And the public safety campaign does not necessarily look at illegal connections, but unsafe connections.
Yes,
so both of those are also covered in that. So if the question was, why did we not talk about this on Morning Live? We never got the opportunity because I said to Mr. Hoa that we need to, then the first 30 minutes of the program that is being broadcast needs to be an Eskom representative talking on one of these topics. But that never materialized.
But of course, SABC would allow an Eskom representative to come and be interviewed on issues of such issues, public interest issues, I would imagine.
Chair, I
Maybe
agree.
not as regularly as Eskom would like, but I would imagine that they would be interested in Eskom conscientizing people about, for example, saving electricity and talking against illegal connections and being safe with electricity.
Chair, we had a meeting with one of the boards of the SABC, of which there was many, and at that board meeting we had presented this, and the board, sorry, not the board, the EXCO had agreed of the SABC that yes, we will, or they will, and they will include it into the DJs or the on-air talents narratives about talking about electricity safety, saving electricity, etc., etc., etc. Unfortunately, things unfolded differently at SABC, so that agreement became null and void because a new board and new members were appointed, and then the whole debacle around SABC, which you're aware of, I'm sure.
Do you recall around about when those discussions had been?
I'm trying to think of who the chairperson was because...
Yes, because I think Mr. Mbikiwa mentioned that there was a new board in 2015. Was it 2015 or was it Ms. Hofmeyer?
It was Ms. Hofmeyer. It was appointed at the end of 2014,
Yes.
December 2014.
Yeah,
Does that more or less ring a bell in terms of
yeah, it could
when
have
it
been,
might have been?
could have been that at that time the chief executive was a lady who came up through the ranks at the SABC.
Yes.
She used to work at Eskom, and that's how I knew her.
Okay.
And now her name has just...
Yes.
I'm not good with names, Chair.
Makoba? Not Makoba or something. Okay. But you say there had been discussions between Eskom and the board of SABC at a certain time, precisely relating to Eskom being given an opportunity to talk at SABC and talk to the public about electricity saving and safety and so on, on a number of issues, and that didn't happen even though an agreement had been reached because there was a new board that came and things took a different direction.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, and of course you were not going to pay anything, or were you going to pay anything with SABC?
Chair, this is where there was always a contentious issue between Eskom and the SABC. We see public safety as a public service announcement, a PSA, which we should not be paying for. The SABC salespeople, who are the people that we deal with, have certain targets to make in order for them to get bonuses. So the PSA or the public service announcements never went any further. We had meetings with the education department within the SABC around this. We had asked our chairman to meet with their chairman, which had taken place, and they've agreed, but it never ever got implemented.
Yes.
So we always paid. So in all of these programs...
But nothing anywhere near what we are looking
No, it
at
would
here.
be, sorry, Chair, for interrupting. It would be more than what we've spent here on New Age, yes.
Oh, that's comes as a surprise to me. Okay, all right.
Mr. Pretorius, can we then turn to the first contract that Eskom entered into with the New Age? That's you describe that from paragraph 48 of your affidavit, but sorry, I'd like you to go to the contract itself. That's at PP6 on page 144.
Yes.
You'll see that at clauses 1 and 2, the advertising and business breakfast sponsorships commitments are set out. That's what we've been discussing, the 4 million and the 7.1 million. But what I'd like to refer you to is to page 149. That's Annexure B.
Yes.
This, as I understand it, is a table that sets out how the million rand is arrived at. Is
Yes.
that correct? And can you give us your comment on the values that are attributed to each of these items? To SABC Live coverage, brand naming, advertising coverage?
The SABC live coverage, 627,000 rand, is a bit low, in my opinion. I can't give you the exact figure because I would have to calculate it per 30 seconds.
It's low as a value, but
As a-
but it's 627,000 rand too high as an actual cost to TNA.
Yeah. But Eskom did not derive the value from 627,000 rand because the discussion on air was not about Eskom. So in my opinion, that has no relation to Eskom.
And sorry to interrupt you, that's partly because, as you say, the ministers who did speak, or the Eskom representatives who did speak about Eskom spoke before the broadcast was actually televised.
Yes.
Okay?
So the minister would be talking about whatever the portfolio would be. The advertising coverage of 377,000 rand, that would be the adverts in the new age. So it is very difficult to determine that because there is no audited Bureau of Circulation figure. It is very difficult to determine the cost of advertising, the cost of an advert in the new age. So the new age had taken a very expensive model in charging for advertising there. But I don't believe as a marketer, that we derived any of that value from that. The venue hire was covered by the ticket sales. The catering was covered by the ticket sales. Sorry, the editorial coverage is valued at 406,000 rand. There was very little editorial coverage. In the beginning, there was on the minister, but thereafter on Minister Gigaba and DPE, but thereafter the editorial coverage was not about Eskom, it was what the minister was talking about. So that was actually of no value to Eskom. The catering, as I said, has been, right? They put a value for the banner at the back on the stage at 300,000 rand. I have no idea how they derived that at that value. The subscriptions of 207,000 rand, so the subscriptions eventually was free. So they just dropped it at our offices and other places, offices, and the tables, the two tables and the two guests is what Jacques had given me and say this is what it costs.
Thank you. To wrap up on the first contract, can I just confirm in terms of the extent to which it complied, or the manner in which it was entered into, complied with the sponsorship policy at the time? Was there an available budget before it was entered into?
No.
So how was it financed?
It was financed initially from my marketing budget. The first couple of breakfasts I paid for from the marketing budget before I applied for more money.
And you gave evidence earlier that in terms of the sponsorship policy, a proposal like this would have to be assessed against the criteria in the policy. Was it ever assessed?
No, it was not.
And was it ever submitted to a sponsorship committee?
No, it was not.
So would it be fair to say it didn't comply with the sponsorship policy at all?
To be fair, I would have to say it has to go through the criteria, and the sponsorship professionals in my department would have to do that. But my gut feel will tells me that this would not have.
Yes, sorry, Mr. Pretorius, perhaps it's the way I phrased the question. I don't mean you to apply the sponsorship policy to it. I simply mean that the sponsorship policy was not applied at all.
No, it wasn't.
Thank you. Just the last point on the first contract. You say at paragraph 60 of your affidavit that you repeatedly raised the concerns about lack of value with Mr. Chweyo, the lack of value that you were getting from these agreements. Can you tell us how you raised these concerns and what his response was?
It was mostly verbal. I don't think I specifically put it in writing. So in my one-on-one meetings on my portfolio with Mr. Chweyo, I raised this. My concern was that this was coming back to bite us, and there isn't proper governance followed. And that was my biggest concern internally. Apart from the fact that we were not deriving the value, internally there wasn't a proper process being followed. And that was what I raised with Mr. Chweyo. Mr. Cheyo's reaction to this was, once again, as on a previous question that the chair asked, Peter, don't fight this. It's already happening. So let's just do this because we have to do this.
Okay. I'd like now to move on to what you describe as the second contract. It isn't necessary for us to deal with this in anything near the level of detail that we've dealt with the first, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that many of the concerns you have with the first contract would apply equally to the second.
Well, more so because between the first and the second contract, we started getting parliamentary questions around the new age, and we had to answer those questions, and as I predicted, that we were going to get a backlash from this.
Yeah, and I'll address that in some detail in due course. Can we just deal with the question of accredited circulation figures from ABC? Can you start by just explaining to me what circulation is as opposed to readership?
So circulation is the actual transaction that takes place. You buy a newspaper and you pay a certain amount for that newspaper, and that's readership. So X amount of people buy the newspaper, and that is circulation. However, I take that newspaper home, and I have a wife and I have adult children who also read the newspaper, and that becomes the readership. So most media owners, when they do a presentation to you, when it's whether it's radio, television, or print or magazines, they will show you the circulation versus the readership. The readership is not determined by ABC. The readership is determined by SARF or AMPS, which is a behavioral study that is done on brands and media. So the ABC only works with the actual transaction that somebody has bought. Peter has bought a newspaper.
That would give you circulation figures.
Yes.
And so when the New Age describes itself as having distribution numbers of 100,000, what does that refer to?
That refers to, oh, sorry. They claimed that they had sales of 39,000. We don't have the proof of that. They had a print run of 100,000. For a daily national newspaper, that's far too little. I mean, we have 52 million people in the country, so, I mean, not even the Sunday Times would be able to do that on a daily basis. But they claimed that they sell 39,000 copies, and the rest was delivered to Eskom, SABC, SAA, Transnet, and so on. So it was just a drop at our turnstiles, for instance, and I walk in and I could or could not take it.
Yes, so those newspapers are dropped off, for example, at Eskom, and they're dropped off for free.
Yes.
Now, you said earlier that readership might be higher than circulation when you've got, for example...
I'm sorry, Mr. Mbiwa, the for free, was that for free in the sense that the staff members could just pick them up and not pay for them?
Correct, Chair.
But it didn't necessarily mean that Eskom was not paying for those newspapers.
Chair,
Directly, maybe there was an indirect payment, but directly?
initially there was a contract between Eskom and the New Age where we did pay for the circulation. I was not involved in that, so I can't really comment on that. I just know that there was an agreement. But thereafter, we said that we are no longer going to pay for the newspaper. And then they came and that's why Mr. Roux has indicated that the subscriptions is part of the R1 million, and that's 207,000 rand but it was at the turnstile, so employees took it for free.
Okay.
And sorry, Mr. Pretorius, the readership numbers might be higher than circulation numbers where, for example, a member of a family buys a newspaper and every member of the family reads it.
Yes.
Do I understand that correctly? But in a situation where newspapers are dropped at turnstiles, readership might in fact be significantly lower than the number of newspapers that are dropped off in that way.
It could be, because people could take the newspapers because they're moving and they needed something to wrap their glasses in, for
Indeed.
instance.
Yes.
What was your observations in terms of how much interest there was among Eskom staff members in the publication on a daily basis, assuming that where they were dropped, you could see when you came to work and when you left, did they sell like hotcakes?
Chair, yeah, they were, by the end of the day, there was no newspaper left. So at the turnstiles,
Yes.
where staff go through, it was
Yes.
lying there, so staff did take it.
They did take them.
And yeah,
Yes.
the question is that did they actually read it or did they just page
Yes.
through it?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
And in terms of who the New Age was reaching, can we just refer to your affidavit at paragraph 59.3? That's at page 18. You say there that the media shop, your media buying agency, determined during 2013 that it only reached 0.5% of the total population of LSM 6 to 10,
Yes.
and that was the primary target market of the
Yes.
49M campaign. And can we move to the table that's below that, which I understand was also prepared by the media shop?
Yes.
Can you explain to us what the table is saying about the New Age circulation and readership numbers?
Okay. So the circulation, the first column you will see that that's the circulation of the various newspapers, and you'll see that under New Age that is highlighted there. There's not a figure in because it's not ABC accredited. The 87,000 is the 39,000 sales that is now including readership, and that research would have been done by AMPS, and then CPT readership is the cost per point. So how much does it cost me to reach one individual? As a marketing person, how much am I going to spend to reach one person? So you will see The third from the top, the business day is at 276 rand and 47 cents, where the new age is at 317. So it simply does not make sense if you just look at the circulation of the business day versus the circulation and the readership of new age.
Do I understand the CPT readership column to effectively be a kind of cost-effectiveness measure?
Yes.
And that the higher the number, the less cost-effective it is?
Yes.
And so on that table, the new age is the least cost-effective for purposes
It is the least cost-effective, but it does not mean, just to clarify, and for correctness sake, it does not mean that if it is, one does not necessarily only select on this, the medium you are going to use, the cost per point, because it also depends on the mix, the media mix that you're going to use at the end of the day. So this is just one indicator, plus the behavioral component needs to be taken into consideration.
Indeed, thank you. Can we then move to the second contract that's entered into? We spoke about monitoring and evaluation requirements under the sponsorship policy. A contract is entered into, the first contract, and before the second contract is entered into, has there been any monitoring and evaluation as to the success of the first?
None.
Now, a major difference between the first contract and the second contract is that whereas the first contract was between the media shop as Eskom's agency and the New Age, Eskom was added as a party to the second contract. Why is that?
Okay, so in the media business, the media owners business and agency business, media agency business, when the media agency buys media from the media, they have 45 days to pay. They pay within 45 days, they get their discounts and their commissions and all of that. So Media Shop applied the same rule to the New Age, and the New Age then was not happy with this arrangement because according to them it was taking too long, and they soon then issued via their lawyers a letter that they're going to take Media Shop to court because they haven't been paid. They also addressed it with Mr. Cheru that this is not being paid. So for this, they wanted, in the second contract, they wanted Eskom to be co-responsible for the payments because they needed the payments at a certain time.
And my understanding is that this contract, unlike the first contract, did in fact go to the sponsorship committee. It was tabled before, or at least the proposal was tabled before the sponsorship committee. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Well, can I refer you to an annexure to Mr. Chweyu's affidavit? Chair, we haven't admitted this as an exhibit, but it is, can we call it provisionally MM2?
Well, you might not need to do that. You might just need to tell him what is in the affidavit.
Okay.
If that will assist him to remember what the position is.
Attached to Mr. Chweyu's affidavit is a round-robin resolution of the 20th of July 2012. It is a round-robin resolution for purposes of a sponsorship agreement, and it indicates that it has been approved by Mr. Chweyu and Mr. Mtakati, 2 members, and that the other 10 members of that committee all signed not approved. Do you remember this?
I recall, yes.
So do I understand that correctly then, that the round-robin resolution rejected the proposal,
Yes, it did.
but that the contract was nevertheless entered into?
Yes.
How did that come to be?
Just remember to raise your voice so that it can be captured, recorded.
I apologize.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry. Yes, I do recall the round robin, and The reason why the second contract was entered into in spite of the round robin was that once again we were forced to. We were told to, you will. So my opinion, personal opinion, was that the New Age was suffering financially, and that's why they were not selling enough newspapers to run a newspaper. And they had no way of increasing sales, so the state-owned entities was used to fund this.
So this time around, can you tell me more about the instruction of being forced to do this? Who did this come from?
I was instructed by Mr. Cheu, who I am assume was instructed by the chief executive, and the chief executive would have been instructed by the chairman by the minister, I would assume, that we have to do this.
But do you have a recollection that on this occasion, Mr. Cheu did say, again, we have to do this because we are instructed? Or is the position that because of what had happened before, you assumed that there was an instruction this time around that this also should be done? Which is which?
It's the latter.
It's the
Chair.
latter.
Yeah, I assumed that this is what we need to do.
Okay.
And in spite of the round robin, there was already contract negotiations going on between the parties.
So the position would be, you don't know for sure if there was an instruction on this occasion, but as far as you played, whatever role you played on the understanding that it was part of, the position was that it was something that you had to do in line with the instruction that had been given earlier.
Well, you'll see, Chair, the second contract is co-signed. This person who signed the contract was Mr. Cheu.
Yes.
So my assumption would be that it's the same. It followed the same route.
Okay.
Chair, I see it's almost time for the lunch adjournment, but if I could have one more question, because the one that you've just asked leads into my next one, which is, Mr. Pretorius, I understand that you were asked to sign to be the signatory to the second contract.
Yes,
But that you refused on principle to do
I
so.
refused.
Why did you refuse?
Because I did not want to be associated with the New Age, and I had, subsequent to, well, gathering from the parliamentary questions and the discussions that was happening in the country at that time, started to realize that this is linked to the Guptas. So I did not want to be part of that.
Thank you, Chair. We can pick that up after lunch.
And who gave the instruction that you refused? Was it Mr. Cheu?
No, nobody gave me the instruction.
But you took the stand that you were not prepared.
Yes, Chair.
And then you were left alone.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll take the lunch adjournment. We'll resume at 2:00. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.
All rise.